All right, Chapter 4, Medical and Legal and Ethical Issues. This stuff affects everything we do. There are a good number of test questions over this chapter, so pay attention. Scope of practice. Regulation and ethical considerations define the scope, extent, and limits of an EMT job. It may include skills and procedures determined by national, state, local statutes and protocols. So it's the care that would be expected from an EMT with similar training when caring for a patient in a similar situation. Scope of practice is what you can do. What you can do. The standard of care is how you should do it. Okay? Scope of practice is what you can do. Standard of care is how you should do it. Consent. Permission from the patient to assess, treat, and transport. There's two types of consent. Express consent must be informed. Patient pretty much is alert and oriented, can make decisions. Implied consent. It's when we assume consent for patients that are unresponsive or unable to make their own decisions. A reasonable person would want medical treatment if they were unresponsive. So implied consent kicks in. Children and mentally incompetent adults. Minors that are not legally permitted to provide consent or refusal for treatment. We can obtain from the parent or legal guardian. There are some possible exceptions. And local parentis means in lieu of the parents. So law enforcement could make the decision in lieu of the parents. Emancipated minors, obviously, they are treated as adults because they have been legally released as adults from their parents. So if they have a life-threatening illness or injury, could be, depends on laws. Normally we have to go with what the parents say. However, this gets into a pretty gray and sticky area. This is where I like to involve doctors. Hey doc, I have a patient, the kid is really beat up, has an obvious head injury. Mom and dad are refusing treatment and transport. What do you want me to do? Obviously, the ethically right thing would be for me to take them to the hospital, but mom and dad are refusing, and mom and dad are in charge unless they're arrested. Or some law enforcement officer says, hey, no, we're taking the kids to the hospital, which could still be a pretty gray area. It's when we like to involve a doctor who has a lot more authority, who can help. We can divert some of our liability and include somebody else. Minors who have children could be an exception, and minors serving in armed forces. Any adult patient incapable of informed decisions about care. We can transport those patients under implied consent as well. Involuntary transport. Anytime the patient is considered a threat to himself or others. So he said, I'm going to kill myself. We can involuntarily transport him. We can take him against his will. We can do it if there's a court order. This usually requires a decision by a mental health professional and or a police officer. If the patient's restrained, we have to avoid legal liability. So we can't hurt the patient while we're trying to restrain them. We take these patients in an ALS system by sometimes sedating them, calming them down. If you're in a BLS system, i.e. you can't give sedatives, this could be a tricky situation. Using soft restraints is typically our best way to go, holding them so they can't hurt themselves or others. So if a patient's trying to refuse care, no man, I'm good, I'm gonna see how it goes, see if I get feeling better, take myself to the hospital, whatever the case is, that's okay, as long as they are legally able to consent. They have to be awake and oriented. They must be fully informed. And then they typically have to sign a release or a digital release saying they understand that there's dangers to refusing care. They understand that they could have a serious injury or illness. But even though that all is true, they still want to refuse. They have to be alert and able to make decisions. Even though we go through all these steps, EMTs and medics can still be held liable. We always want to persuade somebody to go to the hospital. My number one goal when I get called out on a call is to get them to go to the hospital. And if you've been in the EMS for a while, you're probably saying, yeah, baloney. No, it really is. That is my number one goal. Let's get you to the hospital. You called 911 for a reason. Let's get you to the hospital. It's way better for us if we get a patient to go to the hospital. If they agree to consent to transport, We take them to the hospital. We are in a lot better spot. They're in a lot better spot. We know nothing's going to happen, okay? Try to understand why they're refusing care. A lot of times it's something like, I don't have a ride home. I don't know how I would get home from the hospital. What about my things? Who's going to take care of my dog? Who's going to check on my cat? What am I going to do with my wheelchair? How, all these things happen. If you understand the problem, you can understand the solution. If it, ma'am, I'll go take your dog out right now before, well, what if you're gone for a long? Who can I call? Let me get your son up here. Let me call your neighbor. Your neighbor's right here. Can I check and see if they'll come let your dog out? If we understand the problem because we communicated with the patient, we can understand the solution. And then always let them know there are consequences to not going to the hospital. Look, you were involved in a motor vehicle accident. I do not have X-ray vision. You could have nothing wrong with you, but it could be something that is very serious that could even lead to death. Now that sounds dramatic, but I always put that in there because we don't know. We don't know. We don't know what we can't see. Once had a patient, parental refusal on a child who was in a car seat, who was restrained in a minor motor vehicle accident. Very minor motor vehicle accident with slow speeds. The child ended up having a traumatic brain injury. TBI, traumatic brain injury. So there was a bleeding into the brain after they went POV to the hospital. We don't know what could happen. So I always tell them there could be a lot wrong. We don't know. If they can't go, they won't go. And we want them to go. You can always consult medical direction, but most of the time you don't need to, right? Ask the patient, is it all right if you call a family member? See if the family member can help out with the situation. See if they can consider it. If they absolutely need to go and won't, I like to, law enforcement on scene is never a bad idea. Get some more assistance. If we don't get them to consent, sign the form, are we opening ourselves up to liability? Absolutely. If we take them against their will, and they had the ability to refuse, but we take them against their will, this has been viewed in courts as assault or battery. Have witnesses to refusals whenever you can. Don't take people against their will unless they're not able to answer your questions appropriately and or are a serious threat to self or others, or they're minor. They don't meet the criteria to be able to refuse. And then anytime they do refuse, inform them, look, we'll come back. If you need us, you call us. We'll be back in a moment's notice. We are here for you. Okay? If they want to refuse, hey, can somebody stay with you? Look,